Hello everybody. I'm going to try to do a quick tutorial on how to set up some really beautiful lighting and look at how to get some God rays working in our scene. I'm looking at a completely new level here. I'm going to go in with an empty level, and I like to just keep all of my actors that have to do with visual effects and lighting sort of centralized in my scene in one place. And we're going to need a sun. So I'm going to drag that out into my world, and we're going to try something new to 4.26. Under the visual effects area, we're going to bring in a sky atmosphere. When I drop that in for the first time, nothing's going to happen because we have to tell our directional light, which I'm going to actually rename to sun, just so that I know that it's governing my entire scene. I need to tell my directional light, my sun actor, to, you gotta look all the way down to this new setting here, atmosphere and cloud. So I'm going to turn that on, turn on my atmosphere sunlight, and we're going to see there's a sun in the sky. And what's awesome about this system is now we can literally just take the directional light and we can rotate it across our scene, and we can see the disk move up and down, and it will actually affect our atmosphere as though there was water particles and an atmosphere in our world. So it gives us that nice glow along the horizon. We can set the time of day really nicely. We can even set it down under for nighttime, and we can get a beautiful glow once we get some stuff in our scene. I'm just going to set it to about, I don't know, just before sunset. And then I'm going to drop into my scene. And once more, I do like to sort of stay close to my objects central to my scene, just so that I'm not going to lose them. I'm going to bring in a new system called Volumetric Cloud. And I just drop that into my scene, and voila, gorgeous animated clouds. And if you fly up through them, you can actually see that they are volumetric. Super cool. Now, I want to deal with setting up my lighting. So I'm going to give myself, very quickly, just a landscape. I'm going to import something from file that I've got on my hard disk. I'm going to use a height map for this and just import that into my scene so I have something to look at. And it's interesting that the Z value for the terrain is always super low. So I got to switch back to select mode, and I'm just going to bring that up. I don't want to scale it. I want to bring it up, so that it's close to the ground. So I'm just changing my Z value there. Cool. And now we can start to see how this light is going to influence our world. Now, one thing we know from photography is that the world doesn't look like this. It would look, without the clouds and without the atmosphere, this is what it would look like on the moon if we could see forever. But there are water particles in the air, no matter where you are in the world. Sometimes out in the desert, there's less, but in most arid parts of the world, we do have some fog. So we may as well play with this exponential height fog actor. And when you drop it in for the first time, it's going to be a little bit overwhelming. So I just want to point out over here is where you can mess around with the fog density. And that's going to be something that you're going to want to play with off and on throughout the process, just to sort of give some atmospheric perspective on our scene. Yeah, that looks really good. And just for something to look at, I'm going to put a spruce tree into my scene, so that I have some geometry to look through, to get some God rays happening here. Now, I'm going to go back to my sun, and just to be mindful that that is my directional light, in case that's what yours is still called, but I renamed it to sun. Now, often the lighting, it's set up to 10 lux right now. That's something the intensity might need to drop down through this process. But yeah, the first thing I want to do is just turn on a feature that's going to give me some God rays. They call them light shafts. And this is, once more, a setting that you're going to have to play around with a whole lot. So I'm going to turn on the bloom. And it kind of blows out the whole scene. But we can see for the first time that we have light shafts, which is awesome. And it's actually influencing the entire world as well, all the way off to the distance, because the new atmosphere system includes the fact that there are water particles in the air. And those settings are something I'm going to link to down below, to a much deeper look at how to manipulate these settings for light shafts. But this is the real setting to be mindful of here, is your bloom scale. So if you start playing around with that, you start to see how it really influences the scene, but it's going to affect our entire world. Now, the more assets you have in the scene, the less likely this is going to be affected. Since I really don't have much in this scene, I can see way off into the distance. But if I had a fully populated forest right now, this might look nice. But yeah, I'd probably just bring that down to something a little bit more tolerable. Yeah, and this is, you're just using your artistic eye at this point. Now, one thing that's super critical about this process right now is that we start to use a visual effect object in here called a post-process volume. Now, this is going to control the camera. All I need to do is drop it in my scene. Once more, I kind of like to keep it close to home with everything else, because I'm going to tell this object, and there's lots and lots and lots of settings in here. I'm going to tell this thing to have, and I'm going to scroll down just so you can see where it is. It's way down. To have infinite extents. So this is going to control everywhere that my camera goes in the world. And you can have multiple post-process volumes in your scenes. You can give them priorities. So say, for example, you walked into a house and you wanted to have different settings, you can, and just give these separate priorities. But I'm just going to let this manage the entire scene right now. And this is where we start to think more like photographers. We've got exposure control. So you may have noticed the Unreal Engine when you're moving around the world, like you look down and then you look up and you look over and you look around, that the camera will often go through this auto exposure. This is where we can change those settings. So we can change the metering mode, leave it to auto exposure histogram, or the old way of doing it. And then you can actually say, how fast do you want that to happen? So how quickly does it ramp into the next exposure that it's going to figure out, it's going to solve for? So I might say I want that to happen really fast. Cool. And then, yeah, you dig in here and you've got all of the settings. So if you want this to look much more cinematic, you can change your shutter speed down to 1/24. If you want to start to get into exposure compensation, you can do that and begin to manipulate how the world is going to look. You can see it starting to solve for that new exposure. I'm going to set that back up to 1. And if you're mucking around with settings, just be mindful of this little arrow here that you can reset things back to default and get things going. Yeah, so my exposure should start to solve for itself. There we go. Yeah. So this is where you can also get into, with the post-process volume, you can really start to play around with things like the color, if you want to get into color grading. So if your whole world is feeling a little bit too warm, You can go in, for example, you can change the overarching contrast of the scene if you'd like to, and you got full control over here of how you want this to look in terms of contrast, your overall saturation of your scene. If we want to change the contrast in our scene, we can do that very quickly. Once again, this is all done through our post-process volume. If you want to get into literally playing around with individual colors, you can do that as well. For each of your shadows, you can change your temperature of your midtones, your highlights, or you can just go into white balance and just mess around where you want to set that if you want to make it a cold looking scenario, or if you're in a hot desert. Yeah, so that's all done through your post-process volume. You absolutely want one of those in your scene. I'm going to link to another video that is explains the God rays a whole lot better, and it's from the people at Epic, and I can't do a better job than them. So I'm going to leave this tutorial here for now, and yeah, happy world building, everybody.